His lawyer's hand was shaking when he slid the folder back across the desk toward me. "Mrs. Eleanor," he said, and his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Do you have any idea what your father actually left you?" I did not answer right away. I just sat there in that stiff leather chair, 62 years old, wearing a blouse I had ironed 3 times because I wanted to look like I still had dignity, even when I had nothing else. I looked down at the folder. Then I looked back up at him. And that was the moment everything changed. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning because you need to understand what the beginning looked like before you can understand what that folder meant to me. My name is Eleanor. I was married to my husband Thomas for 38 years. 38 years of holidays and anniversaries and hospital waiting rooms and Sunday mornings drinking coffee on the back porch. 38 years of building something together, or at least that is what I believed we were doing. I taught 4th grade for 26 of those years at the same elementary school 3 miles from our house. I knew every child's birthday. I kept crackers in my desk drawer for the kids who came in hungry. I stayed late on Fridays to decorate the bulletin boards myself because I wanted Monday morning to feel like a celebration for them. Thomas was a real estate developer. He built things, he always said, shopping centres, mixed-use developments, a luxury townhome community on the east side of the county that he named after himself, the Whitfield district, and which he drove past slowly every single time we were in that part of town. He was proud in the way that certain men are proud, the kind of pride that needs an audience, even when the audience is just his wife in the passenger seat. I supported everything he did. When he missed our daughter's school play because of a zoning meeting, I told her he was doing it for our family. When he took out a second mortgage on our house in 2008 without telling me until afterward, I did not argue. I trusted him. I had always trusted him. That was the only version of our marriage I knew how to be. Our daughter is named Carolyn. She is 34 now and works in marketing in Atlanta. She has her father's jawline and, for a long time, she also had his habit of looking straight through me when she wanted something from him instead. I say that not with bitterness. I say it because it is true and because it matters later. Thomas told me on a Tuesday in March. He had come home early, which should have been the first sign because Thomas never came home early. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table and he folded his hands together the way he did in business meetings, and he said he wanted a divorce. I remember the refrigerator was humming. I remember I had a dish towel over my shoulder from washing the lunch plates. I remember thinking for one strange second that I had misheard him. I had not misheard him. He told me he had been seeing someone. Her name was Diane. She was 41 years old, a project manager at one of his development firms. He told me it had been going on for 2 years. He told me he was sorry, and the way he said it made it clear he was not sorry in any way that would change anything. I asked him why. He said we had grown apart. He said he felt like he had been living the same day over and over. He said a lot of things that sounded like lines from a movie about someone else's marriage, not ours. I did not cry in front of him. I do not know how I managed that, but I did. He had already spoken to a lawyer. The papers were ready within 2 weeks. He told me the house would need to be sold. He told me the joint accounts had very little in them, which was true, because over the years money had always flowed from our accounts into his business accounts, for projects, for reinvestment, the things I never fully tracked because I had trusted him to track them. He told me I would receive my portion of the sale of the house, which the market had been unkind to, and my teacher's pension, which was modest. That was it. 38 years, and that was what it totaled. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. It was on the 2nd floor of a building that smelled like carpet cleaner and old cooking. I put my mother's china on the kitchen shelves, because it was the only thing that made it feel like somewhere I had chosen to be. Carolyn called me once the week I moved in. She said she was sorry about everything. Then she said she understood why her father had felt the way he did. Then she asked me if I was going to be okay. I said yes. She seemed relieved to believe me. I was not okay, but I had always been the person who handled things quietly, and I did not know how to stop being that person. My father had passed away 4 years earlier. His name was Howard, and he was the kind of man who said almost nothing and meant everything he did say. He grew up without money. He worked in insurance for 40 years, lived in the same house in Roanoke for most of his life, drove a 10-year-old Ford until the transmission gave out. He was not a man who seemed like someone with secrets. After his passing, I had received a small envelope in the mail from an attorney in Roanoke I had never heard of. A man named Gerald Hatch, whose name was printed on stiff ivory letterhead. Inside the envelope was a letter that said my father had left instructions for certain documents to be held in a trust and released to me upon the finalization of any divorce proceeding or in his absence when I turned 65. There was a phone number. There was a note from my father handwritten. Eleanor, I always hoped you would never need this, but I knew you might. Call Gerald. He will explain everything. I love you, Daddy. I had read that note the night it arrived. Then I had put it back in the envelope and put the envelope in the drawer of my nightstand because at the time I could not imagine why I would ever need it. Thomas and I were fine. We had just celebrated our 34th anniversary. We had gone to that little seafood place in Annapolis that we both liked. I had forgotten about the letter for 4 years. The night after I signed the divorce papers, I could not sleep. I lay in my narrow apartment bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about my father, about the way he used to squeeze my hand twice when he was proud of me and did not have the words for it, about how he had never once said anything against Thomas, not in 38 years, but he had also never looked at Thomas, the way he looked at the men he fully trusted. I got up and found the envelope. I called Gerald Hatch's office the next morning. The number still worked. A woman answered, professional and calm, and when I told her my name, she said, "We have been expecting your call, Mrs. Eleanor. Mr. Eleanor. Hatch will want to meet with you as soon as possible." The appointment was set for that Thursday. I drove to Roanoke by myself. 4 hours. I listened to the radio for the first hour and then turned it off and drove in silence the rest of the way, which is something I had not done in years, driven anywhere in silence, because Thomas had always filled silence with the news or sports or whatever was on, and I had gotten used to the noise without realizing it. Gerald Hatch was in his late 70s. Small office. Diplomas on the wall and a framed photo of a golden retriever on his desk. He stood when I came in and shook my hand with both of his, the way very old-fashioned men do when they want you to know they mean it. He asked me to sit down. He opened a file that was thick and organized with colored tabs, and then he began to explain what my father had done. 31 years ago, my father had purchased a parcel of land in what was then an undeveloped area outside of our county. He paid cash. He put it in a trust in my name. He used an attorney so obscure and careful that nothing about it was connected to our family name in any public record Thomas could have found. My father had done this, Gerald told me, because he had watched a neighbor of his lose everything in a divorce, and he had decided that he would never let that happen to his daughter. He had been watching. Quietly, patiently, the way my father did everything. Your father updated this trust every few years, Gerald said. He was thorough. He wanted to make sure it was clean, no ambiguity. I asked him what the land was worth. He turned one of the folders around and slid it across the desk to me. I looked at the number. I looked up at him. I looked back at the number. Is this current? I asked. Assessed 8 months ago, he said. Though frankly, given what has happened in that area in the last 3 years, the actual market value could be considerably higher. I did not move for a long moment. The land my father had bought 31 years ago was a 22-acre parcel in what was now one of the fastest-growing development corridors in the entire region. It sat directly adjacent to a mixed-use project that had been permitted 2 years ago. It was the last large undeveloped parcel in that zone. 3 different developers had reportedly tried to acquire it in the past decade and been told it was not for sale because it was in a trust and the trust had no instruction to sell. Then Gerald cleared his throat, and he told me the part that made his hands start to shake. The mixed-use project built directly alongside my land, the one that had driven the surrounding property values up by 40% in 24 months. The project that every business journal in the region had written about as the development story of the decade was called the Whitfield District Phase 2. My husband had built his proudest project on land that increased the value of a parcel that belonged entirely to me. He had never known it was there. He had tried to buy it 6 years ago and been told by Gerald's office very politely that it was held in a private trust and unavailable. Thomas had moved on. He had built around it. He had made my land worth more than it had ever been, completely by accident, while in the process of leaving me with nothing. I sat in that office for almost 2 hours. Gerald walked me through everything. The trust documents, the title, the assessed value, the legal standing. He also told me that 2 weeks before my father passed away, he had added a codicil to the trust instructions that specified I was to receive the name of a real estate attorney in my county who specialized in partition actions and development negotiations, someone my father had quietly researched and vetted in the event I ever needed to take action with. The land. My father had thought of everything. He had thought of it years before I needed it, when I still thought I would never need it. I cried in that office. I am not ashamed of that. I cried in a way I had not let myself cry since the divorce, because I had been so busy surviving that I had not had room for anything else. Gerald handed me a box of tissues and waited without saying a word, which was exactly the right thing to do. When I was done, I thanked him. He said there was nothing to thank him for. He said my father had been one of the finest men he had known in 50 years of law practice, and that it had been an honor to carry out his wishes. I drove home with all 4 windows down, even though it was 50 degrees outside. I needed the cold. I needed to feel like something was moving. I met with the real estate attorney my father had chosen, a woman named Patricia Brennan, sharp and quiet, and utterly without sentiment in the best possible way. And she laid out my options clearly. I could sell the land outright, which would produce a significant sum. I could develop it myself or through a partnership. Or I could do something more specific. I could approach the Whitfield District Phase 2 project management and inform them that the undeveloped parcel they were counting on for their planned Phase 3 expansion, the parcel that every rendering in their investment prospectus showed absorbed into, the larger development, was privately held in my name and was not going to be transferred for free. Thomas had assumed the land would eventually come available. His whole Phase 3 plan depended on it. It was in his investor documents. Patricia had pulled them. He had made assumptions without doing complete due diligence. He had assumed a lot of things. Patricia filed the necessary notices. We were careful. Everything was done correctly, documented, by the book. I was not trying to punish anyone. I was simply making sure that what was mine was recognized as mine. Thomas called me 10 days later. I let it go to voicemail. Then I listened to it 3 times. He said he did not understand what was happening. He said there had to be a mistake. He said he wished I had just talked to him first. His voice had a quality I had never heard in it before, something unsteady, something that sounded very much like the feeling of something solid falling away beneath you. I did not call him back. Patricia handled all communication. Carolyn called me 2 weeks after the notices were filed. She had heard from her father. He had told her I was doing something vengeful and irrational, and that it was going to hurt a lot of people, including the investors who had put money into his project. She called to tell me her father's side of this. I could hear that in her voice, the rehearsed quality of it. I listened to everything she said. I let her finish. Then I told her, calmly and without raising my voice, that I had spent 38 years being the person in our family who made things easier for everyone else. I told her that a man I never got enough credit for loving had spent 31 years making sure I would not be left unprotected. I told her that I was not being vengeful. I was being an adult woman exercising her legal rights over property that had been hers for 31 years without her knowledge. I told her that if she wanted to understand the full picture, I would send her the documents. Not to persuade her, just so she would know the truth. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Grandpa did this?" I said yes. She was quiet again. And then she started to cry. Not the polished cry of someone performing emotion, but the real kind, the ugly kind, the kind that means something has actually landed. She drove up to see me that weekend. She brought flowers from a grocery store and she stood in my apartment doorway and hugged me for a long time without saying anything. We ate takeout at my little kitchen table, and she looked at the china on the shelves and said she remembered having cereal out of those bowls when she was small. We did not talk much about her father. We talked about her grandfather. I showed her the handwritten note. She held it carefully, the way you hold something you understand is irreplaceable. "He really loved you," she said. "I know," I said. "I just forgot for a while. The situation with the land was resolved over several months through negotiation. I will not say I felt nothing when the process was painful, because it was painful, in the specific way that watching something you built alongside someone be revealed as never fully belonging to both of you is always painful. But Patricia was excellent. I had a good attorney. I had my father's careful, steady preparation behind me. I did not take everything I could have taken. That was my choice, made clearly and without anyone telling me to make it. I am 62 years old, and I have taught children for 26 years, and I know the difference between justice and punishment. I wanted the first one. I had no appetite for the second. What I kept was enough. More than enough. Enough to buy a house again. A small one with a garden in the back that gets sun in the afternoon. Enough to set something aside for the future. Enough to do something I had thought about for years but never had the resources to act on, a fund in my father's name, administered through the county school district that provides supplies and food support for elementary school classrooms with high rates of food insecurity. Because I know what it looks like when a child comes in hungry. I kept crackers in my desk drawer for 26 years and I know. I named it the Howard Fund, after my father. His name, finally, somewhere people could read it. I do not spend much time thinking about Thomas anymore. I heard through someone that things with Diane did not last, but I did not go looking for that information, and I do not hold it as any kind of consolation. His choices are his. The life he built on assumptions and shortcuts, and looking past the person next to him, that is his to live in. I cannot do anything about that. What I think about instead is my father sitting in his house in Roanoke 31 years ago, writing a check and signing a document, and then putting the whole thing quietly away, telling no one, living as if he had not done anything special. Just a quiet man who loved his daughter and understood that love sometimes looks like the thing you prepare for her, in case the worst happens, even when you hope it never does. I have a photograph of him on my kitchen windowsill. He is wearing a plaid shirt and squinting a little in the sun. He is not smiling exactly, just that look he had, the calm one, the one that meant everything was accounted for. I talk to him sometimes in the morning when I am making coffee. I tell him things are okay now. I tell him the Ms. Fund is doing well. I tell him I found the envelope, and I used it, and it worked. I think he knew I would. Some people spend their whole lives waiting for someone to protect them, and it never comes. I was one of the lucky ones. My protection had been sitting in a drawer for 4 years, written in my father's handwriting, waiting quietly for the day I was finally ready to open it. I opened it, and everything changed. I have thought a lot about what made the difference. Not the land, not the money, not the attorney. Those were outcomes. What made the difference was a quiet man in a plaid shirt who understood something most people never act on. That love without preparation is just a feeling, but love with preparation is a shield. My father never lectured me. He never sat me down and warned me about the risks of trusting too completely or building your whole life inside someone else's decisions. He just watched and thought and did something about what he saw. That is a kind of intelligence I did not fully appreciate until I was 62 years old and sitting in a lawyer's office in Roanoke reading a document that had been waiting for me for 31 years. I think about the choices that led Thomas to where he ended up, not with bitterness but with genuine reflection. He was a man who assumed. He assumed the land would come available. He assumed I would accept what I was given. He assumed that because I had been quiet and accommodating for 38 years, that was the whole of what I was. Every shortcut he took, every corner he cut, everything he did not bother to verify because he was confident he already knew. All of it compounded quietly over time until one morning, the ground he thought he owned turned out to belong to someone else. That is not a punishment anyone designed for him. It is simply what happens when a person builds their life on incomplete information and calls it certainty. I was not blameless in my own situation. I had trusted without verifying. I had deferred when I should have asked questions. I had made myself small in ways I told myself were generosity, but were sometimes just avoidance. Part of what I had to reckon with, during those long months in that apartment with the carpet cleaner smell, was my own part in it. That reckoning was uncomfortable. It was also necessary. A person who refuses to examine how they arrive somewhere will keep arriving in the same place. What changed me was not the money. It was the act of deciding to use what I had been given. That envelope sat in my nightstand drawer for 4 years because I could not imagine needing it. The moment I opened it was the moment I chose, finally, to take my own life seriously. Not as a reaction to what Thomas had done, as a decision about who I intended to be going forward. Integrity is not something that announces itself. My father had it. He showed it in the most private way possible. A transaction no one would ever see. A trust no one would ever know about. A letter written to a daughter who he hoped would never need to read it. He did the right thing when there was no audience. That is the only version of doing the right thing that actually counts. I am still learning to live by that. I am 62 years old, and I am still learning what it means to act from your values instead of your fear, to build things carefully instead of quickly, to be the kind of person that the people who love you can rely on in the ways that matter most. I do not always get it right, but I know what it looks like when someone does. I have a photograph of him on my windowsill. I see it every morning. The Howard Fund is small right now, but it is real and it is growing, and somewhere in a classroom in this county there is a child who came in hungry this morning and found something in their teacher's drawer. That is enough. That is in fact everything.